Your soulmate asked a psychic about your money. The truth they discovered was shocking. My beloved child, something unexpected happened the moment your soulmate asked about your money. The psychic did not answer the question they came to ask. Instead, there was a long silence, the kind of silence that makes someone wonder whether they have been asking the wrong question all along. Your soulmate expected to hear about numbers, stability, success, or perhaps the direction your financial future might take. But what they heard was completely different. The psychic looked at them and said, "You're focusing on what this person has today. You should be asking what they are becoming." And suddenly, the conversation changed. Stay with this, because that sentence was only the beginning. Your soulmate had quietly wondered about your financial path for longer than you might imagine. Not because money was the only thing that mattered to them, but because they were trying to understand your future. They had noticed something unusual about you. Even when circumstances seemed ordinary, you carried yourself like someone preparing for something larger. You could experience a setback and somehow return with another idea. You could watch one opportunity disappear and still believe another door existed somewhere ahead. That confused them. So they asked the psychic a simple question: what do you see around their money? The answer surprised them. I don't see someone whose story can be measured by their current situation. Your soulmate leaned forward. The psychic continued, explaining that your greatest advantage was not a mysterious number waiting somewhere in the future. It was your ability to recognize possibilities that other people might overlook. Your financial journey, they said, appeared connected to learning, patience, better decisions, and eventually discovering where your strongest abilities could create real value. But then came the first revelation your soulmate wasn't prepared for. The psychic suggested that there may come a point when you stop chasing every opportunity and begin choosing only the opportunities that actually fit the person you are becoming. Think about that. What if your biggest financial turning point isn't simply receiving more? What if it begins when you finally understand what deserves your time? Your soulmate went quiet because suddenly certain things about you started making sense. The ideas you never completely abandoned. The moments when you seemed frustrated with staying in the same place. That inner feeling that your life could become different if you found the right direction. And according to what they were hearing, those feelings weren't supposed to make you impatient. They were supposed to make you prepare. But wait, because the conversation took another turn. Your soulmate asked, "Are you saying they're going to become wealthy?" The psychic smiled. That isn't the most interesting part. Those words changed the atmosphere immediately. Because instead of promising some overnight miracle, the psychic described something much more powerful, a future version of you who understands money differently. Someone more disciplined. More selective. Someone who realizes that financial progress can come from skills, consistency, smart choices, and knowing when not to follow the crowd. And your soulmates suddenly realized something they had never considered before. Perhaps they had been judging your chapter while you were still writing it. Stay a little longer, because what came next was the part that truly stayed with them. The psychic said there could be a moment ahead when one decision appears surprisingly small at first. A new skill. A project. An idea. A change in direction. Something other people might barely notice. But for you, it could become the beginning of an entirely different financial chapter. Your soulmate immediately asked the obvious question. What decision? The psychic didn't give them a name. Instead, they gave them a clue. When the opportunity arrives, this person will almost overlook it because it won't look impressive enough in the beginning. And that is where the mystery deepened. Because somewhere between the future you imagine and the life you are building now, there may be a doorway disguised as something ordinary. Your soulmate came asking about your money. But they walked away thinking about your potential. And they still hadn't heard the most shocking part. Because before the conversation ended, the psychic revealed why your soulmate themselves might become connected to this financial turning point. And that was the one thing they never expected to hear. Here is where the conversation shifted in a direction your soulmate never saw coming. The psychic didn't immediately explain how your soulmate could be connected to your financial turning point. Instead, they asked one strange question. When this person talks about their future, do you encourage the vision, or do you quietly measure it against where they are today? Your soulmate froze for a moment. They had come looking for answers about your money, yet suddenly the questions were being directed toward them. The psychic continued. Because their next chapter may require something they haven't always received from the people around them, room to think differently. And those words stayed in the air. Your soulmate began remembering conversations with you. Ideas you mentioned casually. Plans you considered and then placed aside. Moments when you talked about wanting more freedom, more stability, or simply the chance to build something meaningful on your own terms. Perhaps some of those ideas sounded unrealistic at first. Perhaps even you weren't completely sure where they would lead. But what if one of them matters more than anyone realizes? Don't rush past this moment. The psychic wasn't predicting effortless money or promising some magical shortcut. The message was deeper. Your financial future could change when your abilities finally meet the right environment. The skill you keep improving. The knowledge you keep collecting. The creative thought that keeps returning. The opportunity you almost dismiss because it begins too quietly. These things could eventually connect. Your soulmate asked, "Then what am I supposed to do?" The answer surprised them again. Don't choose their path for them. That wasn't what your soulmate expected. The psychic explained that your soulmate's role was not to rescue you financially, control your decisions, or somehow deliver success into your hands. Their influence could be much simpler. They might become the person who reminds you of your own ability during a moment when you're tempted to underestimate yourself. And there was another detail. The psychic said your future relationship with money could become less emotional and more intentional. Instead of reacting to every opportunity, you may begin asking better questions. Does this move me forward? Is this worth my time? What am I actually building? What could this decision become 3 years from now? That future version of you caught your soulmate's attention. Because they suddenly pictured you differently. Not chasing everything. Not trying to prove anything. Building. Slowly at first. Then unmistakably. And if this message is connecting with you, share it with someone who is building their own next chapter, leave a comment about the future you're working toward, and subscribe if you want to continue this journey together. Now stay close, because the next thing the psychic said completely changed the meaning of the conversation. Your soulmate asked whether they would recognize your turning point when it arrived. The psychic answered, possibly. But they may misunderstand it at first. Why? Because your turning point might not arrive looking like success. It could arrive looking like a decision to begin again. A new direction after something no longer fits. A small opportunity with enormous room to grow. A skill you decide to take seriously. Or a moment when you finally stop waiting for outside approval and start trusting the evidence of your own progress. Your soulmate became unusually quiet. Then the psychic offered one final clue. There is something this person already possesses that could become far more valuable than they currently believe. Your soulmate immediately wanted to know what it was. A talent? An idea? Knowledge? A connection? The psychic wouldn't say yet. Instead, they smiled and replied, "Watch what they keep returning to." People reveal their future through the things they cannot completely walk away from. And suddenly your soulmate started thinking about you differently. About that interest you keep revisiting. That dream you keep rebuilding. That idea that somehow survives every distraction. Could that be the clue? Maybe. But before your soulmate could ask another question, the psychic added something even more unexpected. This isn't only about how much money they may eventually have. It's about what they could eventually be able to do because they learned how to create it wisely. That distinction changed everything. Because money was no longer the destination. It was becoming a tool. Freedom to make choices. Freedom to support meaningful goals. Freedom to create instead of constantly react. And freedom to become someone whose decisions are guided by purpose rather than pressure. Your soulmate entered that room wondering whether your financial future was secure. They were beginning to leave with a completely different question. What if I have been looking at this person before their real chapter even started? But there was still one unanswered mystery. The psychic had said you already possessed something potentially valuable. And when your soulmate finally discovered what the psychic believed that hidden advantage was, they realized it had been visible in you all along. Then came the detail your soulmate could not stop thinking about. The psychic lowered their voice and said, "The valuable thing they already possess isn't sitting in a bank account. It's something they've been developing without realizing how important it could become." Your soulmate immediately searched their memory for clues. What could you possibly have that you yourself might be overlooking? The answer wasn't a secret investment. It wasn't an unexpected fortune. It wasn't some mysterious shortcut waiting to appear overnight. The psychic described something far more believable, and perhaps far more powerful. Your hidden advantage was your ability to adapt. To learn. To notice what isn't working, absorb the lesson, and eventually approach the next opportunity with greater awareness. But there was more. Watch the way they connect ideas, the psychic said. Something they currently consider ordinary may eventually become useful because they understand it differently from everyone else. Your soulmate suddenly remembered the little things. The questions you ask. The subjects you become deeply curious about. The way you sometimes imagine better ways of doing something. The ideas you mention almost casually before changing the subject. Could one of those ordinary-looking abilities become part of your financial future? The psychic didn't promise certainty. Instead, they offered something more valuable: perspective. Your future, they explained, would depend less on waiting for one giant breakthrough and more on recognizing a series of smaller openings. One choice could lead to knowledge. That knowledge could create another opportunity. That opportunity could introduce you to a completely different direction. And then, slowly, the pieces could begin connecting. This is where your soulmate finally understood why the psychic had refused to give them a simple number. Because your story wasn't supposedly about waking up one morning and discovering everything had changed. It was about becoming capable of creating change. There is a difference. And you might miss the turning point if you only look for dramatic signs. Sometimes the future enters quietly. It arrives as an idea you almost ignore. A conversation that changes your perspective. A skill that initially seems unimportant. A decision to become more disciplined with what you already have. Or even the realization that you no longer need to impress everyone with how quickly you are progressing. Your soulmate asked one more question. What happens when they finally recognize it? The psychic paused. And then came the statement that shifted everything again. They stop thinking like someone waiting for their future, and begin thinking like someone building it. Imagine hearing that about someone you care deeply about. Your soulmate did not know exactly when this transformation might happen. They didn't know what opportunity would trigger it or what path you would ultimately choose. But suddenly they understood the larger message. Your greatest financial advantage might not be something arriving from outside your life. It could be the person you are becoming inside it. More aware. More patient. Better at protecting your time. Better at recognizing value. More willing to learn before making important decisions. And perhaps most importantly, less willing to abandon a meaningful direction simply because the beginning looks small. Then the psychic gave your soulmate a final thought. When their opportunity comes, don't be surprised if other people notice the result only after years of invisible preparation. That sentence stayed with them. Because everyone notices the finished building. Few people notice the foundation. Everyone notices confidence after it appears. Few people see the uncertainty someone had to move through to develop it. And everyone notices financial progress when it becomes visible. Few people see the countless ordinary decisions that created it. Your soulmate had entered that conversation wanting to discover what your money future looked like. Instead, they discovered something about your mindset. Something about your potential. Something about the quiet preparation happening long before anyone can measure the result. But as your soulmate prepared to leave, the psychic stopped them. There is one more thing you should understand. Your soulmate turned around. The psychic continued, when this person finally recognizes their strongest path, their relationship with money won't be the only thing that changes. Your soulmate asked what else would change. The answer? Your confidence. Your choices. The people you allow close to your plans. And perhaps even the way you see your soulmate. Because according to the final part of that conversation, your financial awakening could eventually force both of you to answer a much bigger question. Are you building toward the same future, or simply dreaming about it from two different directions? What happened next made your soulmate realize this conversation had never truly been about money alone. Just as they thought they understood the psychic's message, another question arrived. If their life expands beyond what either of you currently imagine, will your connection expand with it? Your soulmate didn't answer immediately. Because suddenly they weren't thinking about what you might earn. They were thinking about who you might become. The psychic explained that meaningful financial growth can change more than numbers. It can change priorities, standards, daily habits, the way someone protects their attention, the way they decide which opportunities deserve a yes and which deserve a peaceful no. And if your future really does involve becoming more intentional, then the people closest to you may eventually notice something different. You may stop explaining every decision. You may become comfortable moving quietly. You may start choosing long-term value over temporary excitement. And here is the unexpected part: from the outside, that transformation could initially look like distance. Your soulmate asked, "Distance from me?" The psychic replied, "Not necessarily. Distance from everything that no longer matches where they are going." That distinction mattered. Stay with this, because your soulmate was about to understand why their role had been mentioned earlier. They had assumed being connected to your financial turning point meant helping you find an opportunity. Maybe introducing you to someone. Maybe giving you an idea. But according to the psychic, their influence could appear in a completely different way. One day, you might question whether a small beginning is worth continuing. And your soulmate might remember this conversation. They might notice that the very thing you are considering abandoning is something you repeatedly return to. Not because destiny guarantees a particular outcome, but because repeated curiosity can sometimes reveal where someone is naturally motivated to grow. That was the clue. Not a guaranteed fortune. Not a mysterious date. Not a perfect prediction. A pattern. And patterns become powerful when you finally notice them. The psychic told your soulmate to pay attention to 3 changes if they ever appeared in you: stronger discipline, deeper curiosity about one direction, and a growing desire to create something useful rather than simply chase quick results. Your soulmate immediately thought, what if those changes have already started? That question followed them. And perhaps it should make you think too. What have you become more serious about lately? What do you understand today that confused you a year ago? What possibility keeps returning to your mind even after you temporarily set it aside? You don't need to force an answer. Sometimes awareness comes before clarity. And clarity comes before movement. If this story has made you think differently about your own potential, you can share it with someone building quietly, leave your perspective in the comments, and subscribe if you want to stay connected to what comes next. Because there is still one detail your soulmate didn't understand, and it became the most surprising part of the entire reading. Before leaving, your soulmate asked, "So when does their financial life finally change?" The psychic smiled, but this time there was no dramatic prediction. Possibly when they stop asking when. Your soulmate looked confused. Then came the explanation. The moment you become obsessed with a deadline, you can overlook the process capable of creating the result. But when you focus on becoming more capable, learning, improving, saving thoughtfully, developing useful skills, and making decisions with patience, the future stops being something you merely wait for. You begin participating in it. That was the truth your soulmate had discovered. Your money story was not supposed to define your worth. Your current circumstances were not supposed to define your ceiling. And no prediction could replace the choices you make in the real world. But there was still something extraordinary about the conversation. Your soulmate had walked in wondering, how much could this person eventually have? They walked out asking, how far could this person actually go? And just before the door closed behind them, the psychic offered one final sentence. Remember this conversation when their smallest idea suddenly stops looking small. Your soulmate turned around. But the psychic said nothing else. And somewhere in your life right now, there may already be an idea, ability, or direction you've been treating as ordinary. The question is no longer whether someone else can predict its future. The question is whether you will recognize its value early enough to build one. Days later, one detail from that reading kept returning to your soulmate's mind. The psychic had never told them to watch your bank balance. They had told them to watch your smallest idea. That difference became impossible to ignore. Because your soulmate started wondering whether something already happening in your life could be the beginning everyone else would overlook. Then they remembered something. A moment when you spoke differently about the future. Maybe it was an idea you mentioned only once. Maybe a skill you wanted to improve. Maybe a direction you considered exploring before everyday responsibilities pulled your attention somewhere else. Whatever it was, your soulmate suddenly wondered, was that what the psychic meant? And here is where the mystery becomes even more interesting. The psychic's message wasn't that every idea would succeed. It was that one direction could become increasingly clear only after you tested, learned, adjusted, and kept developing yourself. In other words, the clue might not be the idea itself. The clue could be what the idea awakens inside you. More focus. More curiosity. More patience. A willingness to become better without needing immediate applause. That realization changed how your soulmate viewed your financial future. They stopped imagining one spectacular moment when everything suddenly transforms. Instead, they pictured a staircase. One useful decision leading to another. One new ability increasing your options. One mistake becoming information. One small result proving that something deserves another attempt. And then your soulmate remembered another sentence from the reading. Other people may notice only after the preparation is finished. That line hit differently now. Because imagine working quietly while nothing appears extraordinary from the outside. You are learning. Adjusting. Becoming more selective. Understanding where your energy creates the greatest return. Then eventually, what looked like random effort begins forming a pattern. Wait until you understand what that pattern could mean. Your soulmate began to realize that the shocking truth about your money wasn't a prediction of some exact amount. It was that your current financial chapter might tell very little about your eventual capability. Someone could look at today and assume they understand your entire story. But today is only data. It is not destiny. What matters is what you repeatedly do with what you learn. And there was one more layer. Your soulmate wondered whether being close to you meant they should constantly encourage every idea you had. But remembering the psychic's words, they understood something more mature. Real support does not mean pretending every plan is perfect. Sometimes support means asking thoughtful questions. Have you researched it? What would you need to learn? What could go wrong? What would make this sustainable? What does progress actually look like? Questions like those do not shrink a dream. They can strengthen it. And suddenly your soulmate understood their possible place in your journey. Not as the person holding the answer. As someone capable of respecting your growth without trying to control its direction. But then something even more surprising occurred to them. What if your greatest future advantage had nothing to do with finding the perfect opportunity? What if it came from becoming the kind of person who could recognize good opportunities more accurately? That changes everything. Because opportunities come and go. But judgment can improve. Skills can improve. Discipline can improve. Your understanding of money can improve. And once those things begin working together, you may stop needing every decision to be perfect. You simply need enough good decisions, made consistently, to move your life in a stronger direction. Your soulmate finally understood why the psychic had seemed so calm. The message was never, something magical will rescue them. It was almost the opposite. You may eventually discover how much power you already have to shape what happens next. And perhaps that is the revelation meant for you too. Your future does not need to arrive with flashing lights. It might already be introducing itself through the subjects you study when nobody asks you to. Through the abilities you keep sharpening. Through the problems you naturally want to solve. Through the moments when you catch yourself thinking, there has to be a better way. Those moments may be worth noticing. Because your soulmate asked a psychic about your money expecting to hear about wealth. Instead, they heard about transformation. But one unanswered question remained. If you eventually reach that stronger financial chapter, what happens to the connection between you and your soulmate? Would success bring you closer? Would your priorities change? Would you still want the future they had been imagining with you? Your soulmate had been afraid to ask that question. But eventually, they did. And the answer they received revealed something neither the money nor the predictions could measure. For the first time in that entire conversation, your soulmate stopped asking about what you might gain and asked about what you might protect. If their life changes, they wondered, what will matter most to them then? The psychic's response arrived without hesitation: pay attention to what they refuse to trade away. And suddenly, the final mystery opened in an entirely new direction. Your soulmate expected to hear that ambition would eventually become everything to you. More achievement. More recognition. Bigger goals. But the psychic described almost the opposite. As your understanding of money becomes stronger, you may become increasingly aware that some things are more valuable precisely because they cannot be purchased. Your time. Your peace. Your independence. Your ability to choose meaningful work. And the relationships where you can be yourself without constantly proving your value. That last part made your soulmate listen differently. Because perhaps the real test of your future would not be whether success changes you. It would be whether you become clear enough to recognize what should never be sacrificed for it. But stay here, because another piece suddenly connected. Remember the small opportunity the psychic mentioned earlier? The one you might initially overlook because it doesn't seem impressive enough? Your soulmate finally asked why that opportunity would matter so much. The psychic answered, because it may teach them something more valuable than the first result it produces. Not immediate wealth. Capability. Imagine beginning something because you expect one outcome, only to discover that the greatest reward is what you learn while building it. You become better at communicating. Better at understanding people. Better at solving problems. Better at recognizing what creates genuine value. Then those abilities follow you into the next opportunity. And the next. Suddenly, your progress is no longer dependent on one lucky moment. You have become more capable. That was the future your soulmate found so surprising. And then the psychic turned the question around. What if their financial breakthrough isn't one event? Your soulmate waited. What if it is the moment several years of learning finally begin working together? That possibility felt different. Because from the outside, people might call it sudden. They might say you became successful quickly. They might notice the result and completely miss the preparation. But you would know. You would remember the uncertain beginnings. The quiet improvements. The decisions nobody celebrated. The times you changed direction instead of giving up completely. And perhaps one day you would look backward and realize that the chapter you once considered slow was actually building your foundation. Your soulmate asked the question they had been avoiding. If that happens, will there still be space for me? The psychic did not offer them a guarantee. Instead, they said something your soulmate needed to hear. That will depend on what both of you choose to build. Because no prediction can replace communication. No financial future can automatically create a strong connection. And no amount of success can decide whether two people continue growing in the same direction. That part belongs to both people. Your soulmate finally understood. Their place in your future was never supposed to be secured by money. And your place in theirs wasn't either. If your connection became meaningful, it would be because both of you respected each other's growth while remaining honest about what kind of future you actually wanted. Then came one final twist. The psychic asked your soulmate to imagine meeting the future version of you. Not the wealthiest version. Not the most impressive version. The wisest version. What would that person tell you today? Your soulmate thought about it. And perhaps the answer would sound something like this. Stop measuring your beginning against somebody else's middle. Learn what you need to learn. Protect what matters. Become useful at something meaningful. Make thoughtful financial choices in the real world. And give worthwhile things enough time to develop. Because the shocking truth your soulmate discovered was never that some guaranteed fortune was waiting for you. It was that your future could become dramatically different when your abilities, judgment, patience, and opportunities finally begin moving in the same direction. And suddenly, the psychic's first sentence made perfect sense. Your soulmate had been looking at what you have today. The psychic had been asking them to notice what you are becoming. So when your soulmate finally walked away from that conversation, they carried no secret number. No magical date. No promise written into the future. They carried something far more useful. A new way of seeing you. And perhaps somewhere ahead, when one ordinary-looking opportunity appears and asks you to become a little braver, a little wiser, and a little more prepared, you'll remember this moment. Because sometimes the future doesn't announce itself. Sometimes it quietly asks, "Are you ready to build me?" But the story didn't end when your soulmate walked away. Something had changed in the way they looked at every small detail of your life, and that change became impossible to reverse. Suddenly, the things they once considered ordinary seemed worth noticing. Your patience. Your unfinished ideas. The way you keep searching for better answers when the obvious ones don't satisfy you. And one thought kept returning. What if the financial chapter they asked about has already begun, only in a form neither of you recognizes yet? That question followed them. Not because the psychic had promised an extraordinary amount of money, but because the conversation had completely changed their definition of wealth. Your soulmate had entered expecting predictions about income. They left thinking about leverage. The ability to make one skill useful in several different ways, to turn knowledge into better choices, and to let experience compound into something greater over time. Then they remembered a detail they had almost forgotten. Earlier, the psychic had said, there will be a point when they become less interested in looking successful and more interested in becoming financially strong. That distinction was enormous. Looking successful can be loud. Building strength can be almost invisible. It can mean understanding where your money goes. Learning before committing. Becoming comfortable saying no to things that distract you from bigger priorities. Creating something valuable instead of constantly searching for the fastest result. And your soulmate began wondering whether this transformation could already be happening inside you. Maybe nobody else sees it. Maybe even you don't fully see it yet. But what if you've recently become more serious about your future for a reason? Stay a little longer, because there was another piece your soulmate remembered from the reading, something the psychic said so casually that its importance wasn't obvious until later. Eventually, they will stop trying to open every door. At first, your soulmate thought that sounded strange. Wouldn't more opportunities be better? But then they understood. Not every opportunity deserves your energy. Your future might begin changing when you become selective enough to recognize the difference between movement and progress. That means some opportunities may receive a confident no. Some distractions may stop feeling attractive. Some goals may disappear because you realize they belong to an older version of you. And one particular direction may begin receiving more of your attention. That is when momentum can become visible. But here comes the unexpected part. Your soulmate realized they might see that change before you consciously name it. They could notice you talking about one subject more often. Practicing something repeatedly. Studying how certain people solved a problem. Becoming fascinated with a particular field, project, craft, or idea. And suddenly they might remember. Watch what they keep returning to. That was the clue. Not certainty. Not magic. Repetition. Because sometimes the things that deserve exploration keep returning to your attention until you finally decide to investigate them seriously. Then your soulmate remembered another question they had asked. What if they choose the wrong thing? The psychic's answer had been surprisingly simple. Then they learn. Those 3 words changed the entire meaning of failure. Because if every imperfect decision becomes useful information, then your path doesn't need to be flawless. It needs to remain thoughtful. You can test, observe, adjust, improve, and continue. Your soulmate began realizing that perhaps your future strength would come from refusing to let one disappointing result define your entire potential. Think about that for a moment. How many people abandon a meaningful direction because the first attempt didn't look impressive? How many assume slow progress means no progress? And how many never discover what they could have built because they expected the beginning to look like the destination? Your story does not have to follow that pattern. Then something else became clear. The psychic had never described money as the proof that you were valuable. Your value existed before the money. Financial growth would simply give you more choices about what to build, where to spend your time, and what kind of future you wanted to create. And that realization affected your soulmate deeply. Because they no longer wanted to know whether you would someday become rich enough.